4, 3, 2.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to take a couple of minutes and welcome you to UAA today. Today's session that we're logged into is getting on board, promoting early advisor student interaction. Today's presenters are Chandler Whitlock and Deborah Decker. We're going to go ahead and turn the time over to them.
Deborah, go for it.
All right. So thank you for taking time out of your busy day to attend with us. I'm Deborah Decker. I'm the Director of First Year Advising, and I run the Advisement Center here at Dixie State. I've been working as an advisor for about 10 years in various capacities, but always at Dixie State.
And my name's Chandler Whitlock. I'm another advisor here at DSU. I advise specifically in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. Specifically, I advise for students who are majoring in psychology, history, foreign languages. I'm also the pre-law advisor here on campus. I've been at DSU about 4 years. In terms of onboarding, I have been kind of the co-chair of our advising work group regarding student onboarding. So, all right, so again, like Deborah said, thank you for joining us today. So why today's topic? So institutions have very different ways of teaching students on how to use university software, navigating policy and procedures, and helping them develop a schedule that really best fits their goals. Now, historically at Dixie State University, all of these tasks were really the responsibility of the orientation office. And although students were enrolling in classes, there was really no opportunities for students to kind of meet with their advisors until classes began. Waiting to meet with their advisors until their first week of classes meant students really missed out on some critical input when it came to, course information, but also counsel that could put them on the best path, really toward their, kind of ideal college experience. In an attempt to kind of incorporate more academic advising in this onboarding process and to really kind of provide more opportunities for advisors to really kind of build relationships with their incoming students, academic advising became more of a stakeholder in the onboarding process here at DSU. Now, through kind of a series of trial and error, the advising team has really kind of experimented with various ways to reach this goal. And Deborah and I felt that these were experiences that were worth sharing, with individual advisors as well as advising department teams, who might be interested in incorporating advising into kind of more into their onboarding process. So for today, Deborah and I are going to cover the following. So first, we're going to kind of discuss current research, on the relationship between academic advising and onboarding and what trends we're seeing that have really produced successful results, to improve students' experiences as well as their overall success in college. Next, like I mentioned here at DSU, over the last few years, we've kind of used a very trial error approach. And so we're going to cover kind of a basic timeline of what onboarding has been and, what has been the best to serve our students, our student population. We'll kind of review the different iterations of that and kind of discuss some of the pros and cons we found with each of the styles that have kind of been used. Third, one of our main goals is actually to share different tools that advisors can utilize with onboarding and some of the considerations for each option. We'd also like to hear from the audience, so we're going to have kind of a group discussion when it comes to kind of procedures and practices that have been effective at your institutions. Now, sadly, we can't really have a discussion, but we still want to hear from you. So for now, kind of hang tight. We'll ask you to submit your responses to kind of the live Q&A chat soon. So for now, if you can start maybe thinking about what successes you've had and kind of what's worked when it comes to incoming freshmen and transfer students and helping them, kind of get ready for the university. And then finally, we'll kind of provide some final thoughts on regarding academic advisement's involvement in the onboarding process and different considerations that can be useful when you're developing, really any procedure or program, in here. So, all right.
Perfect. So we're going to go over a little bit of research that Chandler and I both looked into when we were putting together this presentation, just because even though we felt that involving advisors and onboarding was really important, we wanted to see, if that was backed by any research, if there was anything out there that would tell us that, yeah, that is a good idea. And so here are some of the things that we found. So in the first article, it talks about how incoming students are motivated, highly motivated and receptive to feedback from advisors. Part of it's because they're so nervous. They're starting this new experience and they're more open to direction than, say, a more experienced student. We also found in the research, and this bears out, I think, in our practice as well, that brand new students have a hard time identifying, hey, what's going to maybe be a barrier for me, or what's going to cause me some trouble this first semester? What are maybe some bad habits that I have that maybe I'm going to need to have to work on this first year in order to do well and to not only do well in classes, but also just making that transition to college. It's just so different from high school. And then in the research, we also saw that about 10% of full-time first-year students actually never go and see an advisor. Those are kind of like those stealth students that it doesn't matter how many emails, text messages that we send to them, they're just kind of doing their own thing, and we don't, get that connection with them. We also anecdotally among ourselves have talked about how interesting it is when we are working in this onboarding process, that when we have that first interaction with a student, it's almost like imprinting happens. That's the why of the duck picture, is because it seems like that first interaction, that first person that is kind, that first person that's welcoming, that helps them solve those problems, they want that person to be their person. So many times we've noticed, like whether it's in a webinar, or whether it's through an email, or whether it's through a phone conversation. And sometimes for these first-time students, they aren't contacting who they really should be, but as long as you're helpful to them, they're like, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to keep asking you, even if you're not really my designated person. And so we thought that kind of was almost like that imprinting that happens for baby ducks, is that you become their go-to, whether you really have expertise in that area or not. And so that also kind of informed our presentation today, is we want that first great experience to be with the student's advisor, someone who is knowledgeable and someone who can really help them the whole time that they're in their college experience. So we'd like to hear from you guys at this point. So please share in the chat, like, what are your views about what role advisors should play in orientation and onboarding? Do you feel they should play a part? Do you feel that they shouldn't? As we're going to discuss later, at Dixie State, we've taken both approaches, and we've kind of seen some very different experiences based on that. The other question that we'd love to hear from you on is, when do you think students should begin contacting their academic advisor? Should that happen before they're admitted? Should that happen only once they're admitted? Should that happen only once they've paid their housing deposit or they've come to orientation? Kind of where in the flow of events do you feel that advisors should begin to be available to brand new students? All right, so what role do you believe advisors should play in orientation and onboarding? That question we actually asked of our advisors on campus, and we tried to ask it of both advisors who had been here a long time, as well as brand new advisors, to kind of get all perspectives. And these are some of the results of those surveys and interviews. The first one says, advisors play a big role. This is their first introduction to campus. We want to show them what advisors can do for them. I think a lot of times for brand new students, they're not sure what an advisor can do for them. They think sometimes that it's all about scheduling, when really we know it can be so much more. Another quote was, advisors are a key part in first connection with students. We help students feel comfortable with their schedule and coming to campus. And I think especially with COVID, we've seen a lot more anxiety from students about their schedule, about coming to a new campus. And so that connection, that reduction of anxiety, I think is even a bigger part of what we as advisors do now than before we experienced COVID. And our last quote was, they also felt that we played a big role. We are the first contact they have at DSU. We tell them about their program and what classes they can take and kind of those options, like opening up their eyes to what they can really do here. And then we also asked, when do you think students should begin contacting their academic advisors? Because we've got advisors who work on our campus solely with first-year students who don't have a major, and then we also have advisors who work with students who have a declared major, are already sure about the, well, or as sure as a student can be about their program, right? We all know that that can kind of be a fluid concept. And so we wanted to see what they said about that as well. And really, when we looked at all the feedback from all of it, it said the consensus was that as soon as possible, that advisor wants to make that connection with that student. Even students that are what we would consider prospective students. So they haven't even really applied to Dixie State, but they've shown an interest. They've come to campus, they've written an email, you know, they have questions. So even at that point, our advisors all across campus said, yep, we want to connect with them at that point. So that was interesting for us to find. All right, so now we're going to kind of transition a little bit into DSU's timeline. I'm going to cover the first part, which is, you know, the furthest back, kind of talking about how onboarding and advising and how they interacted or didn't interact in those early years, and then Chandler's going to cover some more recent history. So I started at DSU back in 2012, and I was what we consider a program advisor, so I was a psychology advisor. And at this point, students were registering at orientation or at other events held at their high schools. Sometimes if they were on campus, we were involved, and sometimes we weren't. So as a program advisor, a lot of times I did not really have a lot of interaction with my students until, honestly, they were juniors and seniors. So I had the highest proportion of students not seeing me from that freshman class out of my group. And we would receive lists of, hey, here are your, you know, here's your list of majors. And sometimes, you know, man, there were only a handful of those brand new students that had been in to see me before the semester started. Those had to be like the really go-getters, the ones who got online and figured out, okay, where's the psychology department page and who's the advisor and where's their contact information. So it was really only those very few that were super motivated to find their advisor, or who had someone in their life who had gone to college and had a good experience with an advisor that was really pushing them, hey, you've got to find out who your person is. You want to meet with them from the get-go. At this point, I think that by and large, most of the registration that was happening for freshman students were basically they were either helping themselves or they were going to parents, or it was our admissions team or our recruiters that were actually helping them to register. And then in 2014, we tried something new. So students were sent a link to an online orientation, or they came to campus and they watched like a video. And then they were given the option, if they wanted help, that they could come to one of several computer labs for help, or they could follow up with an advisor. Here again, you know, it was kind of hit and miss. We didn't have a ton of students who attended on campus. It's really hard to say how many of them even watched the orientation video, and this still was all housed in our admissions team. So there really wasn't a whole lot of collaboration between our admissions team and our advising team, other than to send us, hey, we're having students come this day, can you be there? Kind of a thing is all it was. So it was a little bit chaotic, not necessarily super organized as far as tracking students and who's done what and who's where on the path to being fully admitted, fully registered, and ready to come. Then in 2015, we started to work more collaboratively with our advisement and admissions. And once a student was admitted and had responded yes to an initial email or text that said, hey, you're admitted, are you really planning on coming? And once a student said yes, then we added them to a Canvas course that was created by advisors, and it was dependent upon their major. So if you had a general studies student, they were added to the general studies Canvas shell. If they were, say, Spanish, their major was Spanish, they were going to be added to that Canvas shell. Students still met with advisors, sometimes at orientation, and sometimes they weren't registering until we got to orientation, but they were prompted through this Canvas course of how they could register and how they could contact their advisor. So at this point, we started to see advisors having a much bigger role earlier on. When we were back in 2012, a lot of times during the summers, advisors were finding projects to do, and they were really a lot of times kind of not super busy. But starting in 2015, that really shifted, and we saw advisors being much busier during the summer as they had more outreach to students and students reaching back to them through that Canvas shell.
Awesome.
All right, Chandler, are you ready to tell us about the more recent future?
I'm ready. So we're going to do a little bit of a jump, because from 2015 to 2018, Canvas was still being used, like Deborah described, and it was a key communication tool with students. So, I mean, individual advisors were creating these personalized pages with information regarding registration, general education, and other important information. Now, again, at this stage, advisors still created their Canvas courses individually. Starting in 2019, though, this Canvas shell was kind of standardized, and there was a general template created. So advisors only really needed to make small adjustments to include more specific information related to their majors. So, for example, I advise for psychology students, and as a part of the information I included, centered really on explaining the difference between a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology. There are certain general education classes that are best suited for either program, and informing students of those options really helped them make, probably the best choice that was kind of best for their situation. Now, for 2020, the asterisk COVID year, Canvas was still used, but instead, students completed a survey that really inquired on how many credits they were interested in taking, if they had taken any sort of concurrent enrollment, advanced placement classes, and which ones they'd actually taken, and if they were interested, or if what their interest was regarding a first-year experience course. Now, advisors would use this information and enroll students in a registration block, which is basically a selection of about 5 classes that included an English, a math, and either courses needed for the student's major or just general education classes. Once the advisor enrolled the student in those courses, the students would confirm their schedule, and then they were set for fall semester. Now, this past year, DSU has kind of stopped using Canvas, and instead, advisors have begun hosting registration webinars. Now, at these webinars, students joined to learn really how to register for classes, but then advisors were present to assist with questions regarding classes themselves and really kind of help troubleshoot any sort of registration issues. Now, at first, separate webinars were offered by different colleges. So, for example, all students majoring in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences would attend a webinar together. And then for students who were exploratory or just solely interested in doing general education were also assigned to a specific webinar. In the last few weeks, though, DSU has kind of offered more university sessions where, students from all programs are welcome to attend. Sessions were offered at various times for convenience, but an instructional video shown in the webinars was accessible to students really at any time. So for students that did attend a webinar, advisors would complete kind of a schedule check, as it were. So these checks, basically advisors reviewed the students' classes. They ensured that they were enrolled in the correct English and math, based on their ACT, SAT score. And if necessary, they just provided maybe some suggestions with potential adjustments to their schedule. One of the major reasons that DSU began using Canvas, and these kind of other options was to provide more opportunities for contact with advisors. Like we mentioned earlier, students were able to meet advisors at orientation, but only briefly. So after reviewing feedback from students and parents that attended orientation, we really found a common suggestion was extending that time and really allotting more time for advisors. So you can see all the feedback we kind of got. These are some responses that we pulled from, some surveys from past years of orientation, and that was a pretty common theme we found. Students really wanted more time with advisors, not so much just like, hey, I'm so-and-so, here's how I can help you, but actually getting a little bit more of an advising session, or even just more group advising with their assigned advisor. So, yeah. Now, obviously, DSU has used kind of various methods in student onboarding, which has been very informational, specifically when it comes to different tools and technologies that we have used. Now, each technique has its benefits and unique challenges, and we wanted to kind of share, how different options have impacted our advisors and our students. So first, however, let's cover a little bit more research. And as Deborah and I were preparing for this presentation, these two articles specifically were very validating, regarding the changes that DSU has made, specifically with how DSU has kind of incorporated more online options for students, with this whole onboarding process. So research from Forsnock, McCormick, Nilos, and Rivera really encouraged the use of online interactions, and how increased frequency of meetings with advisors was an important factor for student success. Gravel really corroborated the use of technologies, but suggested the increased use of asynchronous options as well as synchronous options, which I know a lot of us are kind of getting a lot more used to with COVID and online courses and everything, but obviously Gravel really supported that. In a little bit, I'm actually going to share, my new favorite tool in working with students. That's a very effective asynchronous tool, and we'll share that in a little bit, but to be seen. So.
All right, so when it comes to the technology that we've mainly used, we have used others, especially like when advisors were creating their own Canvas shells with their own content before it was standardized. We had advisors using all kinds of different platforms, but these are the four main pieces of technology that we've used. The first one being Canvas. We felt that one of the big pros for that is that some students have used it in high school. It's helping them prepare and get used to using Canvas, maybe setting up their notifications, learning to use the outbox or the inbox in Canvas, and just getting used to that. If they're using it before they get here, then it's not such a steep learning curve when they start their classes, where they're using this to turn in assignments, using this to communicate with their professors. We found that because it was already familiar to some students, they really didn't have, as long as they could log in, they were good. They would jump in, they would use the content, they would ask questions if they needed help. And that was really nice for advisors, because those students who were familiar and could navigate it on their own were able to pull from it the information they needed. They were able to use it, like Chandler said, kind of that asynchronous. They didn't have to be online with us doing things at the same time. They could work at their own speed and gather what information they needed. One of the biggest cons was trouble logging in, because of course this wasn't the same exact login that they had used, in their high schools. For whatever reason, setting up passwords seems to be a difficult obstacle that we still run into. Our IT department has, worked with things. We used to give students a temporary password. That seemed to create a lot of barriers. So now they just set up their own password, and that even as easy as that seems to be, it still seems to be a roadblock at times for students. One of the other cons that we found with the Canvas shell is because it was completely asynchronous. We found that some students, they would log in initially and then never access all the material and just really not do anything. And some didn't even ever log in. And so that was kind of one of the drawbacks that we saw. We did pull some a screenshot for you so you could kind of see what that looked like when we standardized it for each Canvas shell. They would have a welcome page with the pictures of the advisor, and then they would have just a sequence of modules that they would go through with different information. We tried to make them all really clean and easy to follow. Chandler and another advisor on our campus, Craig Dempke, did a ton of work in creating these, but that also did lighten the load from our other advisors so that they weren't creating all their own content. So that's kind of what it looked like there.
All right, so like mentioned earlier, during the registration webinars, there was an instructional video that was shown that demonstrated how to register for classes. This video was created using Loom. Loom is a video messaging program that allows you to record and share video messages from either your laptop or your desktop screen, or even your webcam, and actually you can do both as well. When trying to explain a technical process such as registration, sending students a video of what to do instead of trying to explain like through email or over the phone has been groundbreaking, at least for me. Loom allows me to really demonstrate different registration tasks or like what to do and how to access information, whether that be information from their student account or the university catalog. But some of the benefits of Loom is that the video can be created and uploaded to the interweb. So Loom, it's really just there. Loom provides you a link that you can actually share with your students, and then they can access the video really whenever they want to. Similar to Khan Academy, for those of you who are familiar with that kind of system, they can pause the video so they can confirm they're on the right step before moving on. And they can actually add comments, which are sent to me, and then I can respond and clarify anything if necessary. Now, however, since the video focuses on a specific task, it may not address every individual issue a student may face. So for example, if I send a student a video on registration, but they have like a registration hold on their account, the video is not going to be super useful. Also, once it's published, you really cannot make major changes to said video. So for some tasks, this may not be an issue, but if the registration process changes or if a degree requirement changes, some of the information included on the original video may no longer be applicable, and it may need to be re-recorded. And similar to before, here's actually kind of a view of what students are seeing when they're viewing Loom. So this is an image of the video that was used during our registration webinars. Like mentioned, you can record your screen or your webcam or both. I like recording my screen and myself just because then students can see it's me. It's not just some disembodied voice. I was on the team that made this video for our webinars and I was selected to narrate, so I apologize for seeing my face again. However, since I've used Loom since for other students and I've really enjoyed it, and it's very accessible. I know students have really appreciated how simple it is in terms of getting information and how it's a very clear way to explain some very technical practices and tasks that need to be done, where it can be really hard to explain that in just like the written word. So.
Perfect. And then our final two tools that we've used, especially this last year, like I mentioned, we are working much more closely with admissions, and they've been using a platform called Slate for a while for their communication. One of the pros of Slate is it is very powerful as far as tracking goes. You can see, exactly how many emails a student has been sent, whether they open them or not. That's another huge pro, because we all know, I had a student tell me, oh, I haven't gotten any emails, and I can go in and I can look and I can say, oh, but yes, you have. You just haven't opened them. So that's been a super helpful tool. The con is there is a learning curve with the platform. We are just, as advisors, just barely scratching the surface of being trained on it and learning how to use it. We've used it to set up scheduling for our registration webinars and tracking attendance there. And sometimes we found that Slate may not have the flexibility that we want it to, especially when we're trying to use it, all across campus for lots of different students that have different needs. So sometimes, once you set up a webinar platform and a schedule, you're kind of locked into that. So that has been a little bit of a con for us. But I think as we continue to learn more of the specifics of that platform, it really has been very helpful. And it's been really nice not to have these giant endless spreadsheets to try and track what students are doing. Slate tracks that for you. And then of course the other platform that we've been using all throughout the semester, as well as with our registration webinars, we've done all of those through Zoom. A pro for Zoom is that it is very familiar to some students, a lot of them, especially students who have just finished their high school classes on Zoom, are very familiar with the platform. It's easy for them to share their screen with us so we can see what they're seeing and help them figure out, you need to push the little green button in the bottom, or, oh, I can see that, that you have this hold here. So that's been super helpful. We also have loved the breakout feature, especially as we've had some more of these more general webinars. Then we can actually create breakout rooms for different students and different advisors, and they can work with them in a smaller group. Also, sometimes we've used it when we've had, like, say we have 3 or 4 students that are having problems logging in. Well, then we can create a breakout room for them. They can work with an advisor while the others kind of move on. One of the cons that we've seen with Zoom, and I'm sure this is not news to any faculty member who's used Zoom, is students tend to love to multitask. Our favorite one so far is we had a student that was watching a registration webinar while changing the oil in someone's car. So that can kind of be a con, that students feel like they can multitask, and then later on when they try and go back and actually do what we're prompting them to do, they find that they don't remember, and then they've got to go find that link for that video and watch it again. And so that multitasking, we just all feel the need to do it. Another con is occasionally students will have tech issues, especially if they don't have reliable internet. Then they tend to miss a lot of what's happening as their screen freezes or different things like that. So, any technology is going to have its drawbacks and have its difficulties. But for the most part, I would say that these 4 have been super, super helpful for us as we've been working to help leverage the time that advisors have and the many, many students that we're trying to reach over the course of April, May, June, and all through the rest of the summer.
All right. Okay, so now is your time to share with us. We'd like your thoughts and suggestions on a few questions, so please share them in the live Q&A chat. Let's pull those questions up. Okay, so the first 2 rules of our discussion are, there are no wrong answers and all perspectives are valid. So please share, and we'd love to hear from you. So our first question is, on your campus, how are advisors involved in the onboarding process for incoming students? We're kind of curious with how much involvement advising plays on other campuses, when sharing, how much involvement do you have? Feel free to also share if you feel that that's not sufficient, and then maybe explain why. Give us your thoughts on that. Another question we want your feedback on is, what suggestions do you have for building rapport, in first session with students? Like Deborah mentioned before, there's a little bit of imprinting that kind of happens, when students meet with the advisor, they kind of think that that's their person, forever and evermore, which may be the case, maybe not. But I think there are some definite techniques in terms of developing good rapport with students. So, for example, during summer orientation sessions, and kind of the advisor lunch that we had at DSU, in my sessions, played like a volleyball game in my session. So I basically took like a beach ball and we put like different questions on the ball and tossed it around, and whoever caught it, if their, as it turned out was, if their left pinky, whatever the left pinky landed on, that was the question they had to answer. So I mean, the questions included like pancakes or waffles, or red wines and Twizzlers, really kind of fun icebreaker questions. But also it included more serious questions like, when is tuition due? How do you contact your advisor? When is the first day of classes? So there's kind of this balance of, you know, getting to know them and kind of just having a good time, but then also kind of getting some more important information covered as well. And third, you know, what technologies do you use with incoming students and which have been successful? You know, so we've shared a few technologies so far, but what others have you found useful? You know, this can be programs that you use individually, or platforms that your whole institution uses. You know, please share your favorites. You know, like I said, mine at least right now is Loom. I am loving being able to kind of just like record how to navigate something, you know, on their student account, or how to navigate something on DegreeWorks and kind of show them what that means. I found that a lot more useful, you know, in terms of getting a very kind of detailed explanation as opposed to trying to write something out. So like I said, feel free to please post those. We'd love to kind of chat about those maybe in a little bit. In the meantime though, okay, so
Chandler, there's one that's already in the chat. Can you see that?
Yes. Oh, awesome. Perfect. Thanks so much. So the question is, have you considered mandatory orientation or mandatory advising? That is a wonderful question. And actually, Deborah, do you maybe want to address that in terms of kind of what the timeline is there? I know we've had conversations about that at DSU, but you probably know more than I do about that one specifically.
Sure. So up to this point, orientation, we've never, so this is the first year we're actually charging students a fee for orientation. We have the past probably 5 years, we've said that it's mandatory, but it isn't really. There's no hold put on a student's account if they don't come. We do, so the only time that we do mandatory advising is we do, if students have 45 credits, 30 to 45 credits, and they don't have a declared major, and they haven't told us that, hey, I just want my associate's degree, or hey, I'm going to be transferring, then we do put a mandatory advising hold on their account. The trouble that we found with mandatory advising, honestly, is that some of our advisors have really, really high caseloads, and so mandatory advising for them is a little bit difficult. So we've tried to not use mandatory advising to force students to come in, but to maybe be available in some of the different spaces that students use, using some group advising to try and reach more of those. But yeah, as of yet, we haven't done a mandatory orientation or mandatory advising, but we have talked about it.
Let's see if anyone else has any comments. If not, we can move on. Okay. Well, other people, we can address comments as they come in, but we'll probably move forward. Okay, so we also want to talk about how advising can advance onboarding objectives. So I mean, after compiling this information, you know, Deborah and I feel that advising should play an important role in onboarding. However, you know, how this is managed changes, and in many cases, it should be different depending on your institution. So these are important factors that we suggest considering when thinking about how to incorporate advising and orientation. You know, I'm sure there are many more, but these can give you maybe a good start. So the first is like your institution. So I mean, things to consider can include, you know, what are the goals of your institution? You know, is it trying to grow the number of students enrolled? Is it trying to maintain your current population? How does being maybe an open enrollment institution, how does being a private institution, maybe even a teaching or research school impact the needs of your students? How would that change kind of the goals there? Your students themselves, you know, what demographics are most important on your or most prevalent, excuse me, on your campus? You know, how might that impact when you introduce information, or when information will be most salient? So for example, at DSU, we have a very significant number of students who are first generation. And to make sure that these students are best served, we need to ensure that we make no assumption about what a student's experience is, or what they might know. So when developing Canvas and other information materials, we need to be more cognizant of using jargon that could be completely foreign to students, you know? And if there is jargon used, we want to make sure that we explain it very clearly so they understand what we're referring to. Another factor might be just the general culture of the admissions and advising department's relationship. So how much of a relationship really is there between advising admissions and maybe even orientation departments, right? Who needs to be brought into the conversation and begin developing those kind of relationships? That's an important consideration there. What are current trends or expectations? And this could be trends and expectations you're seeing on your campus from administration. It could even be just from parents and students. What are their expectations about advising? What do they expect it to be? How much involvement do they really see? And maybe what trends in higher education generally are worth considering? What is happening at other campuses that might apply to your institution? Other thing to consider are what are the most important things that you want to accomplish, which I think is a very specific, factor for your institution. So, I mean, what are the main goals of the entire onboarding process? Yes, and you think it's important to consider, once a student completes this process, what should they know how to do? What information should they, be very, comfortable with? Does the structure of your program really stay aligned with those kind of goals and objectives? How does that work? And lastly, and Deborah kind of touched on this, would be advisor workload, right? Can your current advisors devote more time to incoming students with their current workload? How can workload be best shared to ensure students are receiving quality care? As we want to make sure that we're, helping our students, we want to make sure that we're also, not just swamping our advisors in the same way, right? That's not going to help anybody. Because that's not going to help us much. And there are many more, like I said, but these are some important ones to consider. I think what's most significant to keep in mind is that every school is different. Every school population is going to be very different. And so it's important to be very mindful and do a little bit of introspection of, okay, for what we have right now, what's going to work best? What tools are really going to serve as our students the way we want it to serve our students? So.
And then just kind of as a conclusion, what we looked at after we, had kind of gone through all of our interview statements, as we'd gone through the data that we had looked at and kind of gone through that timeline of how things have shifted and changed and evolved. These were our kind of concluding statements that really we have seen that advising can play an important role in student onboarding, and that we as advisors feel that they should. Sometimes this can be a little bit tricky depending upon the culture on your campus. When we first created an onboarding advisor work group, our admissions team was like, hey, wait, that's our job, that's our word. So it took a little bit of communication back and forth to be like, no, this is what this group is working to do. They're working to create materials for advisors to use as we're helping students in that process. We're not looking to take over your process. We also found that the benefits of early engagement with advisors included some important things like unique opportunities for rapport building, a better chance for students to develop their ideal schedule. Scheduling is so important, especially in that first year when students are a little bit nervous making that transition. And a lot of times they don't know a ton about themselves and what they prefer. So having at least a few things that are ideal for them can really, really help them to get off on the right foot. And we also found that if we see them early, we're able to promote some of those university resources that support good student habits, like the Writing Center, like the Academic Performance Center, or we have also a Math eLab. And if students just start off using those resources, things tend to go much smoother than if they get to midterms, they don't have the grade they want, and then there's like, okay, what is out here that could help me? That tends to be a much harder shift to make or pivot to make than to just start off using those resources from the beginning.
So that is everything that we have. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our presentation. We're so happy you're able to, hang out with us and let us chat about onboarding. Here's our contact information, so feel free to reach out to either of us through email. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, if you want to collaborate on anything, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So yeah, thank you all so much.
And we do have a few minutes, so we're welcome to, if you want to post anything in the chat, we'll be here for another, 6 minutes or so. If you have any questions that you'd like for us to answer.
Hey, Chandler, I'm going to jump on and ask a question.
Right.
When you're doing the onboarding with these students, have you utilized like live Zoom with the students, and what's been your response with them? Are you doing like big groups? Or are you doing smaller ones? Like what are you seeing with that?
That's a great question. So in terms of those registration webinars, they have been done through Zoom, and they are live Zoom sessions. So like Deborah mentioned, we feel like that's been really effective in terms of communicate with students. We don't want to do the webinar function in Zoom just because that doesn't allow students to really have that one-on-one engagement. What we've also found, let's see, I'm trying to think. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's been effective. I know we really enjoyed the breakout function like Deborah mentioned. In terms of the cap, we do cap it at 50 students. So it's not like, too many at once. And so we've tried to kind of keep that somewhat capped. And honestly, in terms of the number of students who have signed up for a webinar versus how many have attended, even if we have 50 signed up, in my experience, you only have about 30 or so, 35 who actually attend, which is pretty common, which makes it a little bit more doable. I know for my college, because like I said before, we kind of hosted the webinars by college, and for humanities, there were about 2 or 3 advisors on any given webinar call, and so there would be kind of a lead person who would kind of manage the main session, but then the other advisors were there to kind of manage the chat, to answer questions there. Like Deborah mentioned, we want to have a breakout room. We've actually found some really good success with that. It is kind of a time commitment for advisors because we did have sessions that were kind of, Mondays through Wednesdays at 4 o'clock. We had some evening sessions which were great. But I think advisors have actually seen some good benefits from being able to engage with their students. I know personally I've really enjoyed it. Just kind of get to know them, and they actually I think what's nice, they get to see what we do as an advisor, right? And it's because of an active, they're right there with us. We're getting them registered. It's a group advising session virtually, but that's what it is, a group advising session. Sorry, Clint, I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
I would also be honest and say that when we were first getting used to it, it was a little bit of a heavy lift. By next week, we'll have done 166 of these webinars. So it's been a lot in that respect, just because, advisors, unfortunately, we have those times of the year where we're really juggling multiple populations, right? We're trying to help our current students. We're also trying to help our brand new students. But the webinars at least have allowed us to present the information to, like Chandler says, 30 or so students rather than having 30 individual conversations. And so that has helped us a little bit, but I'm not gonna lie, it was a little tough at first, that time commitment.
Thank you.
I'm just waiting on questions.
Yeah, I actually just figured out that the way you submit a question is clicking on the question bubble.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, we're Zoom experts, not Teams experts. That's for sure.
True.
We're learning. We're learning.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions.
I think so.
All right.
Losers to Hill, thanks for joining. Appreciate you joining us.
Well, and thanks to Clint and Craig. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, thank you.